Hi, I'm Rasul, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I am doing CriminOllys Read What You Own challenge, where my husband has picked out 100 of the books on my shelf, wrapped them up in newspaper, given them all a number, trying to keep them right side up, and then I am picking them one at a time to read and review. But this time I went on a trip, so I have read 4 books. And now I'm going to just shortly give my review for them. So the first book I picked was Judith Butler, Gender Trouble. And this was a book that I had wanted to read for a very long time, in regard to Judith Butler being sort of the huge name within the academic sphere, especially when it came to queer and feminist theory. And in this book, she is presenting her idea, which is quite common now, but was sort of revolutionary when she first wrote about it, which is the idea of gender performance. So that gender is something we do just as much as something we're born with, or actually even more than what we are born with. I'm glad I knew a bit about this theory before I started reading the book, and I'm glad I actually have the academic background that I have, because this book is not the easiest book to read. She has a comment in one of her introductions. I think it's the introduction from 1999, where she talks about how people were infuriated that such a poorly written book became so popular, because she has won prizes for being a quite poor writer. And it reminded me of a sketch done by The Onion, where you have, I think it is a steel worker who sits there and states that, oh, if I had only read 600 pages of genderqueer theory earlier, I would have understood. Talking about everything. Brilliant sketch. Absolutely one of my favorites, because it does sort of point to how academic language, especially when it comes to social issues, it's still not necessarily easily accessible if you don't have an academic background. And in part, I think that education is important. There is a reason why we get an education. I'm not bashing education at all, but I don't really know if sort of a steel worker would have been able to understand what is written in this book, because the language is so inaccessible. Which is sad, because I think that what she is talking about, this sort of idea that gender is something we do, and what she then sort of does talk about, doesn't really talk about, it's a bit difficult because I didn't always understand her, is again, where does then the ideas that we have about how we perform gender come from, and how do we then understand these practices in our daily life, not as a theoretical framework, but how we interact with one another in our day-to-day, which is probably where it is important in one sense. But you can't really I know I'm talking a lot about how this is a sort of an inaccessible book, and in part it actually is. If you agree or disagree with their theory, you still have to take their theory serious because it's such a staple and so important. So absolutely a wonderful book, even if it is so difficult to read. The next book that I read is Penguin's little black classic, which is The Suffragettes. And this is just a collection of articles, posters from the suffragette and anti-suffragette movement. So, for example, vote for mothers, why you as a mother should work to get the vote. And it doesn't have any sort of historical context to it. So, for example, one of the things they talk about is an article about how a woman was force-fed while she was in prison. And that's it. That's the only thing, because that's the text that was at the time. I know that when the suffragettes did bad things to get their voices heard, they would force sort of the judges to send them to jail as if they were men, because equality means equality, also when it came to sort of the bad stuff. And there they would go on hunger strike, because a lot of the suffragettes were on hunger strikes. And then they would sort of be force-fed because they were almost dying due to the hunger strike. So that is the historical context. And I, in some way, enjoy the fact that none of it is contextualized. It's only sort of the articles, the posters, sort of the things that were happening at the time. But it does also mean that you yourself have to sort of make some of the connections yourself. And this is from the anti-suffragette movement, which was a postcard with this crying child. And the poem on the back, "Mummy is a suffragette, and I am no one's pet. Oh, why am I left all alone to cry and suffer yet?" And whether or not you're pro or anti-suffragette, that's just a very, very good poem. So for those who are interested in a little black book and interested in women's history, very, very fun sort of view into what was going on in Great Britain at the time regarding that debate and discussion. The next book I read is The Coca-Cola Company by Abo Rasul. This is about a porn company and how they deal with everything being miserable, because that's sort of what the story is about. Life is miserable and pain, and there is nothing anyone is going to do about it. So if you agree with that, you probably will love it. If you disagree with that, you're probably going to hate it. One of the things that I really liked about it is that there is a subplot about, I think it is the director of these adult films, and he has a son, and his son is acting out in school. He is about 7 or 8, and he is vandalizing, he is sort of ruining, sort of talking, speaking, being disruptive in class. And during a Christmas sort of break, sort of a Christmas party in his class with sort of his classmates and their parents, he changed the very sort of family-friendly film with one of his father's adult films. And what I absolutely liked about that sort of subplot, and I think why it worked with sort of everything is miserable and everyone is miserable, is that he sort of talks about how this boy has no one who really likes him or supports him. So his parents are just annoyed because he's doing all of this bad stuff. And because he's doing all of this bad stuff, all of his teachers are starting to dislike him. So he's sort of being sent to the principal's office, who doesn't really care for him, because why should I care for someone who is just being disruptive? He is sent to the school psychologist, which I didn't think was really a thing in Norway, but apparently it was in this book. And he doesn't really sort of, well, why should I care about someone who doesn't really want to be cared for? And the teachers sort of think, okay, if I have to choose between him and everyone else, I need to choose everyone else. So it sort of shows how easy it is, if there is a child that is misbehaving, that can end up being a sort of very negative spiral. Because if a child misbehaves, it's very quickly that no one wants to care for that child. And because no one cares for that child, well, that is the question mark that the book presents. If the child had been cared for, would the child then stop misbehaving? So I thought that sort of subplot was interesting in the book. And some of it was just, oh, you're trying to insult my sensibilities. How quaint. There is a sort of, for anyone who's sort of seen sort of Chicago Dune, I think that the second series was called. There is a song from one of them which is about how musicals from the 70s who really want to shock you because they were made in a different time aren't really shocking anymore. And that's, I think, also part of what is sort of, no, adult films don't shock me. And then the fourth and last book is from the philosopher Lars Svensson, Stupidity, Idiots, and Stupid Idiots. And this is a popular science book. My husband and I talked about that this is sort of a typical book that you buy at an airport, because you need a book that you will read in about 2 hours and that will make you feel a bit more intelligent than before your flight. It talks about critical thinking, how important critical thinking is, especially today when we have so much information at our fingertips, and how that information doesn't really matter if you can't critically think about it. So understand what is important, what is not important, and how to judge that not all information is equal. And he focuses a lot on critical thinking as a form of social act. So it's important to keep having discussions with other people to sort of test your theories and ideas. But at the same time, he does sort of have, among other things, an example of a friend that became a huge Trump supporter, and where sort of the conversations with him just stopped because his friend was not able to actually discuss anything regarding Trump. So he, in some way, sort of, I like his ideas. They are very well presented, easily presented. You don't need a master's degree to understand it. But at it, because, so for example, with this story, with this friend that's become a Trump supporter, well, now what? Or when he talks about the importance of understanding that not all information is equal. Well, how do we deal with that? And it can be, to me, he doesn't really need to have any answers to it. It's just bringing up the topic. For example, what do you need to judge something as true? So if I told you something, gave you a bit of information, how would you judge that as true? What would I need to do for you to judge stuff as true? And to think about that. And thinking about that in an abstract way, because it's very quickly that we agree with the things that we already agree with. But then the echo chamber starts. So just sort of entering sort of those questions, I think would have elevated the book a bit. So it didn't become too sort of basic, but an absolutely wonderful introduction if you're at an airport. So that's the 4 books that I read while I was away. And now I am going for the next book. If I can get my jar open. Of course, I'm going to struggle with getting the jar open when I've just read The Sufferagettes and Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. And I am reading book 31. So give me a moment and I'll find 31. 31. This is... I haven't planned this. This is Kjell Terje Ringdal, The Art to Convince, a handbook. First I got Judith Butler, then The Sufferagettes, and now just after reading Stupidity, Idiots and Stupid Idiots, I get a book about how to convince people to do stuff. So that's the next book, and thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.